A quiet airport terminal. Michael Carter walks confidently toward the security checkpoint, carrying his duffel bag. Tension slowly builds in the air as two officers watch him intently. He's just a soldier, returning home after months of service. But the moment he steps into the airport, two racist cops mistake him for something else. What happens next will shock you. Stay tuned. Drop your location in the comments, and make sure to hit like and subscribe for more real stories that expose the truth. The hum of bustling travelers filled the airport terminal, the sound of wheels on the polished floor echoing through the space. Michael Carter, a black soldier fresh from a successful mission abroad, walked toward the security checkpoint, the weight of his duffel bag a minor inconvenience compared to the adrenaline that still buzzed through his veins. He had been gone for months, on assignment in a hostile territory where every moment could be his last. But now here he was, returning home, eager to see his family and get some much-needed rest. He had made it through some of the most dangerous missions imaginable, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to face. As he approached the security line, he felt the eyes on him. It wasn't just the usual curious glances. These stares were heavier, more pointed. He brushed it off at first. Soldiers often caught attention in airports, especially when they were traveling in uniform. But then he heard the muttered comments, the whispers. He'd been on the receiving end of racial profiling before, but this was different. He could feel it in the air. A surge of discomfort ran through him. "Hey you!" a voice barked. Michael stopped and turned. The officer, a tall white man with a rigid expression, was pointing directly at him. His partner, a stocky officer with a thick mustache, stood beside him, scanning the crowd. The officer's eyes narrowed, and Michael could feel their judgment before they even spoke. "Step over here," the first officer said, motioning toward a nearby desk. Michael's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. He had dealt with these situations before, but it never made it any easier. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked calmly, his voice steady, though a hint of annoyance crept into his tone. "We need to check your identification," the officer replied curtly, "and your bag." Michael's brows furrowed. "I've already been through security. I don't see why there's a need for more questioning." The second officer, who had remained silent, stepped forward. "You've been flagged for additional screening," he said, his tone laced with an unspoken edge. Michael's instincts kicked in. Something was off. The way they were treating him, too dismissive, too cold. It wasn't just about routine security measures. This felt personal. Before he could respond, the first officer walked over to him, standing too close. He didn't flinch, but his body tensed. The officer's breath was rancid with stale coffee as he leaned in. "You think we don't know what's going on with your kind?" the officer muttered. Michael's heart dropped. It was subtle, but the comment was enough. The officer was using his position to belittle him, to assert control. "Watch yourself," Michael said, his voice cool though he couldn't hide the tension in his jaw. The officer smirked and motioned to his partner. "Take his bag," he said. Michael didn't move at first. He was trying to assess the situation. He had learned over time to keep his composure, but he could feel the heat rising inside him. "Now," the officer repeated. Reluctantly, Michael let his bag be taken by the second officer. As the officer rifled through it, Michael kept his eyes fixed on the first cop, knowing it was better to stay calm. But his hand was already near his own weapon, his mind racing to find an escape route if things went south. "You're just a soldier," the first officer said with a sneer, "thinking you can come into this airport like you're special. We run things here, not you." Michael's fist clenched. He had been in hostile situations before. His training had prepared him for more dangerous foes than these two racist cops. But being treated like a criminal for simply existing was something he never expected to deal with. Suddenly, the second officer let out a loud laugh and the first officer joined in. "What, you think we don't know what's going on in this country?" the first officer taunted. That's when Michael had had enough. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, his blood rushing in his ears. But just as he was about to respond, a voice cut through the air. "Is there a problem here?" Both officers froze, their eyes darting to the source of the voice. Michael didn't have to look to know who it was. The tone of the voice was too familiar, too authoritative. His heart skipped a beat. In the doorway stood a tall figure, a man in a dark suit. His presence immediately commanded attention. The officers didn't recognize him, but they clearly felt his power. The man walked forward, his every step measured, his gaze intense. "Everything all right here, gentlemen?" the man asked, his voice smooth but firm. The officers remained silent, their faces flushing with embarrassment. They hadn't expected interference. Michael looked over, his heart swelling with relief. The figure in the suit wasn't just any man. He was someone who would change everything. The man approached Michael, his gaze never leaving the officers. "I suggest you release this man immediately," he said with authority, "before things get much worse." The tension in the airport was palpable. The two officers looked nervously at the man in the suit who had just intervened. His presence was imposing, his calmness radiating authority. Michael, still handcuffed, could barely contain the sudden relief rushing through his body. This stranger, this figure in the dark suit, wasn't just an ordinary person. He was someone who had the power to make these racist cops back down. The officers exchanged a quick glance, their earlier confidence faltering. "Who the hell are you?" The first officer, Daniels, growled, his voice low and defensive. The man in the suit, unfazed, didn't even acknowledge the question. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a badge. The glint of it caught the officer's eyes. FBI. The two officers stiffened, the color draining from their faces. Michael's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea who this man was, but the very sight of that badge was enough to change everything. "You're under arrest for racial profiling and abuse of authority," the man said in a firm, cold tone, "and I'm taking over from here." He turned to the officers, who were now clearly rattled. "Release him." His eyes bored into them like steel. "Now." Officer Harris, still silent, shifted uncomfortably, his gaze shifting between the badge and Michael, who was still kneeling on the ground, his arms sore from the cuffs. The situation had shifted completely, and now they were on the defensive. "But sir, we were just following." Officer Daniels started, but the man in the suit silenced him with a raised hand. "I don't want to hear your excuses," he said. His voice was calm, but the authority behind it was undeniable. "You will face an internal investigation. I'll make sure of it. Now step away from the suspect." The officers looked between each other, their hands instinctively reaching for their cuffs, clearly unsure of what to do. They had no choice but to comply. With a sharp motion, they unlocked Michael's cuffs. He rubbed his wrists as he stood up, his body still tense, but now filled with a new kind of strength. For the first time since this ordeal had started, he felt a spark of hope. Michael locked eyes with the man in the suit, and for a moment there was no need for words. The man gave him a slight nod, acknowledging the tension that had been building in both of them. But before Michael could speak, the stranger turned toward the officers, who were still fumbling with their own confusion. "Your badges are now being revoked," the man in the suit continued. "You'll be detained for further questioning and brought to justice for your actions today." He turned away from them and looked at Michael again, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" Michael nodded, slowly standing tall, now free from the handcuffs. "Thanks to you," he said, his voice steady but filled with gratitude. The man in the suit didn't respond right away. Instead, he motioned for Michael to follow him. "We'll talk somewhere more private," he said, gesturing toward the exit. Michael followed the stranger through the terminal, each step heavier than the last. The truth was becoming clearer by the second. He had no idea who this man was, but his presence had turned the tide in his favor. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, the worst of it was behind him. As they walked through the airport corridors, Michael couldn't help but wonder who was this man, and why had he chosen to intervene. It was clear that something much bigger was at play. This wasn't a random act of kindness. This was part of something far larger, something that could change the course of everything Michael had known. They arrived at a quiet corner of the airport, far away from the bustling crowds. The man in the suit stopped and turned to face Michael. "You're lucky I was here," the man said. "But this is far from over. These officers were just the tip of the iceberg. I've been tracking this corruption for months. What happened today was part of a larger plan, and I need your help." Michael's mind raced. "Help? How could I help? I'm just trying to get home." The man shook his head. "It's bigger than that. You've seen it firsthand. The abuse, the prejudice. I need someone on the inside, someone who understands what's at stake." Michael's heart skipped. He didn't understand at first, but as the words sunk in, he realized the weight of what the man was saying. This wasn't just about one incident. This was about a system that needed to be torn down, piece by piece. And if he was going to make a difference, this man, whoever he was, might just be the key. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. Michael had no idea what the stranger in the suit was planning, but one thing was clear: the situation had escalated far beyond a simple case of racial profiling. His mind raced with questions, each one more urgent than the last. Who was this man? Why did he intervene? And what did he mean when he said Michael could help? Layla, Michael's sister, had been the first person he called when he was freed from the airport. Her voice had been a steadying presence on the other end of the phone, calming his nerves and offering reassurance. But even her words couldn't quell the growing anxiety that gnawed at him. The officers who had tried to detain him were part of something larger, something much more dangerous than a simple act of racism. Michael had dealt with corrupt systems before, but he hadn't anticipated it being so close to home. The officers' faces haunted him, as did the dismissive way they treated him. What scared him even more was the realization that they weren't working alone. "Are you sure this is safe?" Layla had asked when Michael told her about the strange man in the suit. "What does he want with you?" "I don't know, Layla," Michael had admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But I'm not going to let this slide. I can't. If this guy really knows what he says he knows, then we need to hear him out." Michael sat in a quiet corner of the airport, waiting for the man to show up again. The man had said he would be back, and Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the answers he needed were just around the corner. The minutes dragged on. He pulled his phone out, scanning the news. The footage of the incident at the airport had gone viral, and social media was ablaze with accusations of police brutality. The public outcry was deafening, but as much as Michael wanted to join the protests, he knew that he had to stay focused. He couldn't get caught up in the chaos, not yet. He needed answers. "Michael," a voice called, and he looked up. The man in the suit had returned, flanked by a group of agents who wore the same serious expressions. Their eyes were scanning the area, alert and ready. It was clear that whatever this man's role was, it involved more than just Michael. "I didn't want to involve you like this," the man said, his voice low but firm. "But it's too late for that. You're already part of something much bigger than you realize." Michael rose from his seat, his body tensing at the seriousness in the man's tone. "I've been asking myself that same question. What's this all about? What did you mean when you said I could help?" The man looked around cautiously, making sure no one was eavesdropping. "I'm Agent Bradford, with a special division in the Department of Justice," he began, taking a seat next to Michael. "We've been investigating a network of corruption within local law enforcement, and those officers who tried to arrest you were just the tip of the iceberg. But we've uncovered something worse, something that involves more than just a few bad cops." Michael's heart sank. He had suspected it, but hearing it from someone else confirmed his worst fear. The officers who had targeted him were just pawns in a larger game, a game that went all the way to the top. Bradford continued. "There's a group of corrupt officials, including members of your local police department, who have been working with criminal organizations. They've been using their positions to protect drug traffickers, arms dealers, and worse, and they've been doing it for years." Michael clenched his fists, his mind racing with anger. "How do you know all this? And why did you come to me?" Bradford's eyes locked with his. "We've been tracking these operations for months. I knew you were coming through the airport today. The officers who tried to detain you were involved in one of these rings. They didn't recognize you, Michael, but I did." Michael stared at him, his mind processing the weight of the words. "You knew me, but why didn't you tell me sooner?" Bradford sighed, looking around cautiously. "You have connections that could expose the entire operation. You're not just a soldier. You're a direct descendant of a family that's been fighting this type of corruption for generations. Your father wasn't just a military hero. He was a part of a larger network of activists, whistleblowers, and individuals who have been trying to take this down from the inside." Michael felt the weight of Bradford's words. His father had been a hero, a man who had fought for justice both in and out of the military. But this was something Michael had never expected. Bradford stood up, motioning for Michael to follow. "I need your help to take down this network. The officers involved aren't just a few bad apples. They're part of a larger criminal conspiracy. We need someone on the inside, someone they won't expect, someone like you." Michael hesitated for a moment, his mind still processing everything. But deep down he knew he couldn't walk away from this. Not after what had happened, not after everything he had seen. "All right," Michael said, his voice steady. "I'm in. Let's take 'em down." The world outside had grown darker, and Michael's decision to join the fight for justice had set him on a path that was far more dangerous than he had anticipated. Agent Bradford had briefed him on everything, every step of the plan. They needed him to infiltrate the corrupt system, gather intelligence, and take down the criminals who were masquerading as police officers. But the stakes were higher now, much higher. Michael sat in a safe house with Bradford and several other agents, staring at the computer screen in front of him. They had gathered intel, photos, and documents linking several officers to organized crime. It was all connected: drug trafficking, illegal arms sales, and worse. The officers were working with high-ranking criminals, and the network extended further than anyone had realized. The screen flashed with photos of the officers who had detained Michael at the airport. Daniels, but there were others too, bigger names, powerful figures who had escaped the public eye for far too long. Bradford leaned over Michael's shoulder, pointing at the screen. "This is where the corruption runs deep. They've been covering for each other, protecting their own interests, and it's all been hidden behind a badge. But we've got them now. We just need you to help us expose it all." Michael nodded, his heart heavy. His role in this mission was becoming clearer by the minute. He wasn't just a soldier now, he was a piece of the puzzle that could bring down an entire criminal enterprise. But that didn't mean it would be easy. The risk was immense. He had to be careful who he trusted, and time was running out. The sound of a phone vibrating broke the silence. Bradford answered quickly, his voice clipped and urgent. "What's the update?" he asked. A brief pause before the agent on the other end spoke. "They've gone to ground. We've lost track of the officers we've been following. They're making moves, preparing for something. We think they know we're closing in." Bradford's expression darkened, and he turned to Michael. "We need to act fast. They know we're onto them. But we have one advantage. They won't expect us to come for them this soon." "Then let's move," Michael said firmly, his voice steady. "I'm ready." Bradford met his gaze, impressed. "Good. But this isn't just about arresting a few crooked cops. It's about taking down the entire network. We're going after their connections, the ones they think are untouchable, and we'll use their own tactics against them." The agents around them began preparing for the operation, checking their equipment and making final adjustments. Michael felt a surge of adrenaline. The plan had been set in motion, and there was no turning back now. Later that evening, under the cover of darkness, Michael and Bradford, along with a few trusted agents, infiltrated a high-security location linked to the officers' criminal activities. It was an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a perfect hiding spot for those who thought they were above the law. Michael's training kicked in as he moved quietly alongside his team, avoiding detection. His heart pounded, but his mind remained sharp, focused. He had been through dangerous situations before, but this felt different. This was personal. This was about revenge for his father, for the injustice that had been done to him, and it was about stopping these criminals from hurting anyone else. They reached the warehouse's front entrance. Bradford signaled for them to hold their position as he checked the layout. The plan was simple but risky. Storm the building, neutralize any threats, and gather as much evidence as they could. But Michael knew it wasn't going to be that easy. He could feel the tension in the air, a growing sense that the enemy was always one step ahead. "We move in 5, Bradford whispered, his eyes scanning the darkened space in front of them. Michael nodded, his mind racing with possible outcomes. The door creaked open, and they entered swiftly. The warehouse was eerily quiet, too quiet. They moved through the building, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Suddenly, the faint sound of voices echoed through the hallway. Bradford motioned for them to take cover. Michael's heart rate spiked as the voices grew louder. He knew they were close, too close. Then the door at the far end of the room slammed open. 2 officers, Daniels and Harris, emerged, accompanied by several armed gang members. They were well armed and ready for a fight, but they weren't expecting the team waiting for them in the shadows. The gunfire erupted in an instant. Michael moved with precision, his military instincts guiding him as he took cover behind a stack of crates. Shots rang out, echoing off the steel walls of the warehouse. He had been in firefights before, but this felt different. This was the moment he had been preparing for. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for everyone who had been hurt by the system. The officers and gang members scattered, taking cover behind crates and machinery. But Michael was focused. He had one target, Daniels, the officer who had tried to humiliate him at the airport, the one who had brought his brother's death into the equation. Michael's eyes locked onto Daniels, who was trying to escape. But Michael was faster. He sprinted toward him, using the cover of the warehouse to close the gap. Daniels turned just in time to see Michael coming. His face went pale with fear, but it was too late. The warehouse was plunged into chaos. Gunfire reverberated off the metal walls, drowning out the sound of heavy footsteps. Michael's heart pounded in his chest as he locked eyes with Officer Daniels, who was frantically trying to make his way to the exit. But Michael wasn't going to let him escape. Not this time. Not after everything he had done. Daniels spun around, but it was too late. Michael lunged forward, slamming into him with all his weight. They both hit the ground hard, but Michael's training kept him in control. He had been in situations like this before, close combat, the fight for survival. But this time, it was different. This time, it was personal. "Get off me," Daniels screamed, struggling beneath Michael's grip. But Michael tightened his hold, not allowing the officer to break free. "You don't get to walk away," Michael growled, his voice low but full of rage. "Not after everything you've done." Behind them, the firefight raged on. Layla and the agents were still pinned down, exchanging gunfire with the remaining officers and gang members. But Michael couldn't focus on that. His only focus was on Daniels, the man who had humiliated him at the airport, the man who had been part of a corrupt system for far too long. Daniels pulled a knife from his belt and slashed at Michael's arm, but Michael was faster. He twisted Daniels' wrist, forcing the knife to drop to the floor. The struggle continued, but now it was Michael who was in control. With a swift motion, He pinned Daniels to the ground, pressing his knee into the officer's chest. "You're done," Michael said through gritted teeth. "You're going to pay for what you've done." Daniels gasped for air, his face contorted in panic. He had thought he was untouchable, had thought that his badge and his position protected him from the consequences of his actions. But in that moment, he realized just how wrong he was. "Please, I didn't mean to," Daniels stammered, his voice barely a whisper. But Michael wasn't listening anymore. He wasn't interested in excuses. Daniels had crossed the line, and now it was time to make sure he faced the consequences. "Too late for apologies," Michael said, looking down at the officer with cold, unwavering eyes. Just as he prepared to bring Daniels to his feet, a loud bang rang out. Michael's body tensed, expecting more gunfire. But this wasn't a shot aimed at him. It was a warning. He turned around to see Agent Ramirez standing at the entrance of the warehouse, her gun raised. "Move now," she shouted. The rest of the federal agents had cleared the remaining gang members, and the situation was quickly de-escalating. Layla, who had been fighting alongside the agents, rushed over to Michael. Her face was smeared with dirt and sweat, but her eyes shone with the same fire they had since the beginning of this fight. "You all right?" Layla asked, her voice tight but filled with concern. Michael nodded, still gripping Daniels. "Yeah, I'm good, but this is far from over." The agent who had taken down the rest of the gang members came over, handcuffing Daniels. "We've got him," the agent said, "but we need to get out of here. The cavalry's coming. We'll need to move fast." Michael reluctantly released his hold on Daniels, letting the agents handle the arrest. The adrenaline was still rushing through him, but a sense of relief washed over him as the officers were taken into custody. The fight wasn't over, but it was a victory. As the team filed out of the warehouse, heading for the safe house, Michael couldn't help but think about his father. This wasn't just about his own fight for justice. It was about continuing the fight his father had started. The system had been broken for far too long, but today it had been cracked open. As they drove away, the faint sounds of sirens grew louder in the distance. The media had already begun to gather outside, ready to report on the scene. But Michael didn't care about the cameras. He cared about one thing, bringing change. And with Layla by his side, he knew they were just getting started.